Welcome to the Kerrville Bible Church podcast, where we seek to encourage and equip you for the work of ministry by taking a pastoral look at a variety of biblical and theological topics. Stay tuned until the end of the episode to learn how you can submit a question for us to answer on the podcast. Welcome back to the Kerrville Bible Church Pastors Podcast. My name is Toby Baxley. I'm joined as always by Scott Christensen, Chris McKnight, and Murray Van Gundy, and we are here with another episode, a fresh episode for you of this podcast that you love, and we're so thankful that you love it, and it is a blessing to you, and we know that because you tell us, and it keeps us going. I think if it weren't important to you, we would have quit by now. So, because
we may still quit.
We may still quit, but we could go to lunch a lot earlier in the day if we didn't record this podcast.
Our
but
listeners
we do it for
need to
you.
know it's 12:30 as we record.
It is 12:30,
and we're all hungry. Stomachs are growling around the table, and we may be on the 30-minute leash today instead of the 38-minute. Right?
We'll see.
And I love it. You have confidence in saying, we know you love us, because they wouldn't be listening if they didn't want to listen. So it's even if it's just one listener, we can say, we know you love the podcast because you're listening.
That's right. That's right.
Cool.
Hey, so we're going to start again with our second installment of Bible or Not.
Oh, all right.
We started that
not.
yesterday.
So I get to
Last
flex.
week.
This is where
That's right.
Chris has memorized
right.
half the Bible.
Yeah, chapter and verse by Reverend McKnight.
I'll say, so we're on number 11. A feast is made for laughter. Wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything.
Man, I'd have said the first two. I'd have said it was a proverb or something in Psalms. But after the third one, I say no, not in the Bible.
I would think that's from Ecclesiastes.
I agree with Scott.
Chapter and verse, Scott? I mean, Chris?
Let's go with 3 or 4.
No, it is the Bible. I actually missed this one because of just what you said.
Yeah, the first two I'd have said yes, but
Yeah, right. It's
Money one.
Ecclesiastes 10:19.
loser. Solomon.
So
What a loser.
what a mess.
This just means I get to go to Ken Johnson's class on Ecclesiastes in the fall and strengthen up my knowledge.
That's right.
I hope that wasn't premature. Is he on board?
I think he is. Yes.
Oh, he is now.
Yes.
Okay.
So-
Yeah.
He is. We've committed him.
Maybe this will whet everyone's appetite
That's
for
right.
Ken's class.
All right, number 12. Too long have I lived among those who hate peace.
Well, that's an interesting one.
Yes, Psalms.
Yes, David.
Yeah, it sounds very biblical.
No, I don't think it's David.
I like that.
Not David?
I don't think so.
Sounds very biblical.
What'd you say?
I said it sounds very biblical.
Yeah, it
but
sounds biblical. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it is. It's Psalm 120, which is one of the Psalms of Ascent. I don't know if those are attributed to David or not, but yeah. Yeah, the end of that is I speak peace and they call for war. Right. Number 13. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what is visible. Come on, y'all know this.
That is
That's
Hebrews.
That's Hebrews.
Hebrews.
It's the NIV
Hebrews
translation that's
chapter what?
keeping us challenged.
Chapter
That's
11.
It's chapter 11.
That's
Yeah,
11.
it's the Hall of Faith.
The Hall of Faith.
Hebrews
Yeah.
chapter 11.
All right. Number 14. Stand with anyone that is right. Stand with him while he is right, and part with him when he goes wrong.
Yeah, I don't think that's in the Bible.
No.
Not. You're right. It's Abraham Lincoln. Number 15. The world of men will fall, and all will come to darkness, my city to ruin.
That's Lord of the Rings.
Hey, all right. Yes. That's Boromir from the Lord of the Rings. Number 16. I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny.
That's
Jesus.
Jesus.
Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
Luke chapter 12. Number 17. Why you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes.
Yes, James. 4.
That's right. Number 18.
Brother of Jesus. Yeah.
Half brother.
Half brother. Sorry.
Half breed.
Got to get that precisely correct there. Yeah.
Number 18. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Jesus
Right.
In the garden.
Garden of Gethsemane.
This is Mark 14:38. Number 19. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. This comes up every January.
That sounds like something from Star Wars. I don't know.
From Star Wars.
What's it from?
It's from Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
A testament of hope. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is in January, isn't it? It's one of the
Right.
Yeah, and inevitably many people will post that on their Facebook.
As a Bible verse or MLK? They'll attribute it to MLK.
No, they'll attribute it to him, but it's almost like on the level. It's on the level with
has
Scripture. It
equal
feels like
inspiration.
sometimes. Yeah.
Something like that.
All right, last question. Do not love sleep, or you will grow poor. Stay awake, and you will have food to spare.
Yes. Proverbs 6.
The sluggard.
Go to the ant, O sluggard.
Ant.
No, it's 20.
Works.
20 verse 13.
It's also in 6.
He's going to look it up.
I'm not.
We'll save it for later.
Okay. Well, on to our topic du jour, which is we've been looking at victory over blank, and we've what have we looked at? Last week it was victory over sexual temptation. Before it was victory over anger. And so today we are looking at how to have victory over greed and the love of money, selfishness, materialism. That's right. And so we want to dive into this and see what would come out that would be encouraging to you.
Well, I got to pick the topic, and one of the reasons I picked it is because we are in a very affluent area, a very affluent church, and we're Americans, and we're Texans, and we're all part of the 1%ers of the world, and so regardless of where people are relative to other people in your church or in your community, we all have, generally speaking, a lot of financial options, a lot of financial blessings in our life, and so I think this is a real issue for everybody, pretty much that I know. I don't know of too many people that this isn't an issue at some level, and so I just want us, especially our church listeners, to be encouraged, to be exhorted, to be challenged, to not love money, to hold these things loosely, be good stewards, all that stuff. So I'd probably like to just start with one way to have victory over greed and materialism. There's a lot of ways to attack this sin, but one way to attack it is to give, is to be a generous, giving person. And this is not an advertisement to give to your church. Unless you're not doing that and you belong here, then you should be giving. But this is just to be a generous person that just gives as a reflex of life. It's your church, it's other charitable organizations, it's other ministries, it's other missionaries, it's giving to family members that have need, to neighbors, to individuals. And so I think this is where you can really address the heart of the matter of greed and materialism is a self-centeredness, a self-focus, a selfishness, and the way to slay that dragon is to hold everything loose and look for opportunities to give it away. And so, kind of on that note, I just want to reiterate what we've talked about before. We don't preach tithing here. We don't believe that as New Covenant Christians under the in the gospel, under grace, that we are obligated to tithe. If you want to go down that path under the law of the Old Testament tithing laws, then it's actually more than 10%. You start adding it all up, it's somewhere in the 20 to 30% range of the various taxes and obligated giving under the law. And so what we believe as we come into the New Testament under the New Covenant are principles of New Covenant giving. And there's 4 of them, generally speaking, and it's from 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. And that is that we give generously, joyfully, sacrificially, and regularly. And that makes it more of a Spirit-led thing than a formula, than a percentage. It makes it more where everything belongs to the Lord, and I'm His steward and His manager. And now God cares as much about my heart as He does the amount. In fact, those passages say God loves a cheerful giver. The implication, if you're not cheerful, that's the root of the matter, and you need to address that first and foremost. And so, generous, sacrificial, joyful, and regular. And I would just challenge our listeners who have any kind of struggle with greed and materialism and when is enough and money, to look at your giving and see if it meets those 4 qualifications and pray about that and address it from that angle.
Yeah. So backing up, because we could pray and go to lunch right now, but backing up, where does this come from? Where does this mentality of hoarding treasure on earth, where does it come from? It's sin. Jesus addressed it in the Sermon on the Mount about not storing up your treasure on earth, but storing up treasure in heaven. But where do we get that?
Yeah, I would just say it's a way that we, if you want to use Augustine's notion that we have this God-shaped vacuum in our heart, and since we always are suppressing the truth of God in our unrighteousness, we're always finding idols to replace God with. And I would say one of the greatest idols, that historically has been there is the love of money. And, I'm reminded of what Paul says in First Timothy 6, which interestingly has a lot to say about this subject. Verse 7, he says, we have brought nothing into the world, so we can take nothing out of it either. It's a matter of perspective. He says in verse 8, if we have food and covering with these, we shall be content. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires, which plunge men into ruin and destruction. Wow, that's some pretty heavy-handed language there. Verse 10, he says, for the love of money, and notice that a lot of people misquote this verse, and they say it's money that's the root of all evil. No, that's not true.
Right.
It's the love of money that is the root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. But then if you jump down a few verses, verse 17, there's a different perspective here that Paul gives. He says, instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Instruct them to be good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life indeed.
Yeah. It's sort of the oldest sin in the book, really. It's the temptation to believe the lie that God's holding out on you. The whole, did God
Something
really
more.
say, that you can't eat of any tree in the garden? Is like, oh, Eve, God's not as good to you as you have been led to believe. You need to take some for yourself
And if you get this other thing, then you'll be happy. Then you can be content.
Right.
If this other thing comes, I would say, I mean, this is, I think, a good follow up. Didn't even think about this when I picked the topic, but to last week's, because probably right behind number one, sexual sin, is the love of money. I mean, you think about transcends time, cultures, transcends generations. I mean, I even think of our kids before they get bit by the sexual bug, so to speak. Before puberty, they'll start loving money.
Yeah.
They'll start loving stuff and wanting. When they figure out money and figure out what you can do with it and stuff and toys and video game and all that's happening before 12 or 13 or whatever, right? So
think about just broadly in our culture, whenever we see corruption at a high level, whether it be political corruption or corporate corruption or whatever.
Or in the church.
In the church as well. Yeah, exactly. Follow the money.
Yeah.
And they're always connected. When the love of money becomes an idol, a fundamental principle that drives your heart, it's going to lead to all sorts of corruption.
Yeah. You use the word treasure. Sorry, Toby, you used the word treasure. And obviously Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, rust, moth, thieves. And then for where your treasure is, there your heart will be. And I think that if we are going to be full disclosure, completely transparent, vulnerable, and honest with each other, right? We talk about...
Can we just be transparent but not vulnerable? Can you draw
talk about... Well, I don't know in
much.
this case. So, but if you're going to be really honest, we talked about it last week, that, you got to have somebody that you can be honest with. This sin of greed and materialism and money, love of money, that kind of thing, do you have somebody in your life you can be completely honest with? Because if you want to be completely honest, open up your checkbook, open up your budget, and say, you are welcome to look at this. Here's who I really am. Because you want to know who people really are? Look at their checkbook. You want to know, right? This is what Jesus is saying. It's in the heart. And you'll know. And boy, even saying it makes me cringe a little bit because you think, oh, heck no. I'm not going to let anybody who has the right to look into my spending habits and my checkbook and my budget and my salary. We think about salaries. They're so funny. Except in ministry. It's the weirdest thing. It's like it's the only place where there's a group of people that know how much you make.
Ministry and public servants.
Public servants,
Right.
And it's like no one else is coming in and saying, yeah, this is actually this is my gross and my net salary. No one talks about that.
Right.
And how dare you look into what I spend? It's mine.
Right.
And that just shows the root of it. And man, that needs to be uprooted in our lives. How you go about doing it, I mean, you've got to be honest with yourself, right? You got to be honest with yourself. You want to know where your heart is, look at your checkbook.
Yep. So we understand why people in the world, lost people, would do this. They don't have God. They have no pathway to contentment. They don't have true joy. They're insecure. They don't even know real love. And so, they're propping up all of these things that are lacking through possessions, their house, cars, clothes, appearance. Even if they don't have the money to buy those possessions, they'll go out and borrow the money to buy those possessions so that they can project a certain reputation, all those things where people are just, upside down on cars and in over their heads on mortgage debt and on credit card debt. And I mean, it's a massive problem in our culture. It's a massive problem. It's especially American. American dream, where all the wealth here, all the constantly the bombardment advertisements, et cetera, et cetera. So we understand that. I mean, I understand that. I can see where people in the world would live for that. And what other choice do they have,
Right.
But where it gets confusing is the Christian who has the Holy Spirit, who is loved, who has the Bible, who has the church, who all those things, and certainly let's be realistic. Most Christians are probably tempted in this area in some form or fashion to accumulate too much, to buy too often, to shop too much, just to spend on things you don't need. I mean, that's what every Christmas is, right? That's why I get so jaded about Christmas. Here, I'm buying a gift for somebody of something they don't need or want, and I'm doing this out of some obligation often, and I get sideways on that. But why is it? Why are Christians caught up in this?
It's a sin.
I mean, how does it have a power over Christians?
Well, it's like how does what our topic last week have a power over Christian, right? How does lust and sexual immorality have it be the root of that sin, right? It's a heart issue. I love meeting Christians who have the gift of giving. It's like their spiritual gift of giving, because they are the most generous people you have ever met, and they will even say, "I ask God to give me a raise, give me more money so that I can give more." I mean, wow! If that doesn't cut to the quick, when you meet people, it's less than more. But what a great lesson we can learn of, and because I think what you said, Chris, a great remedy to this materialistic American dream. This is mine. I've earned it. It's my money. I love is, man, be a giver. Be a giver and do it first, right? Even be a first fruits giver.
And I think something that we should disabuse ourselves of is the notion that it's always the rich people that have the problem with money. Right. That's true. That's generally not always the case. I mean, it seems to be the what everyone thinks. Right. But, Jesus talked about, the widow that gave, her last set of pennies, in the temple. It wasn't hardly anything, but it was all that she had. I think Paul talks about, is it in Philippians, where he talks about how the church gave out of its poverty. Right. And, so, a lot of people think that when they're in financial straits, well, the first thing that needs to go is giving to the church or whatever, because, they don't have that proper perspective on money. And, if we have that notion that everything belongs to God in the first place, and everything that we do is something that God has given us, we're just stewards of the resources that God has given us, the talents or energy or ability or command to do. We don't despise work. Paul talks about, those that, that don't work. In 1 Thessalonians 3, it says, if you don't work, you don't eat. Right. And Paul says in 1 Timothy, chapter 5, for those that aren't providing for their own households, they're worse than unbelievers. Right. And so it's a matter of proper stewardship of the resources that God has given us. Right.
We don't want to go too far the other direction to asceticism, or the idea of becoming a Christian means I've taken a vow of poverty. I mean, that's Catholicism.
And we're not socialists either.
Socialism. That's works righteousness. That's all kind. So again, it's not money's neutral. It's the love of money. It's the worship of money. It's the adoration of money, and it's the greed and the stinginess, and that's the sin, not the money itself. And so, Abraham was wealthy. David was wealthy. Solomon was wealthy. You've got these men of God in the under the old covenant that had abundant wealth, obviously, and so. That in and of itself is not the issue, and neither does it mean we only eat, cold can of green beans every night for supper, bread and water. We sleep on the cheapest, worst mattress we could find. Everything we buy is the cheapest we could find. That's not stewardship to me either. Yeah, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a hard attitude toward your resources, and then this issue of materialism on the other side of I've always got to have the nicest, the newest, the best, and what is that? What is it in a believer's heart that says I've always got to have the newest phone, the newest car, the best clothes, the newest everything, and can you be content? Yeah. If your needs are met right now. Here would be a test. Murray's throwing out some if your needs are met right now in these areas, would you be content to not change any of that for a month, for 6 months, for a year? Would you be content for a year with only the clothes that are in your closet right now, only the shoes that you owned, only the furniture that you owned, and said, yes, our needs are met. I don't need to go spend any money on any of this for X. How much time could you say I could be content? Almost like, I think if this is something where somebody is enslaved to it, they almost need to fast. Even thinking about like a repenting, like a fasting, an abstinence.
Yeah, for sure.
We talked about the sexual thing, the accountability, and get it off your phone and all that. Just the abstinence. And so here's like for people who are caught up in this, and I've known people that just like they can't go a day without shopping. Buying things they already have, and so can you go a week or a month or 6 months? That's a question to think about. And then I think about it for me. I don't like to spend money. I don't shop. I don't go buy clothes or cars or shoes. I mean, I have to wait till I'm at the, yeah, exactly. What do I love though? I love food. I love food, and I don't skimp on. I don't skimp on food. So I have to every once in a while. I want to just have a very bland, very boring, very run-of-the-mill meal for myself to just say, "Are you content?" Does it have to be great every single time?
No.
Can't you just eat some noodles and some black-eyed peas and a glass of water and be fine with that? Yeah.
Paul's perspective on that in Philippians 4 is really interesting because, he's talking about the Philippians who, he's really writing a letter in a sense to thank them for a gift, a financial gift that he had given them. And so, he talks about how they were concerned before but lacked opportunity. In verse 10, he says, "But not that I speak from want." He says, "For I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means. I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need." So it's a very interesting perspective because it's like, what is contentment? Contentment is learning to live with whatever your station in life is. You may live, and all of us go through periods of time where, wow, got this extra cash or whatever, and learning to be just as content, with not having that as you are with having it, and that's difficult to do. And
he learned contentment. He pursued godliness and he pursued contentment, and that was great gain to him as he wrote to Timothy. What we also need to remind our listeners too is that we're not trying to separate you from your money. This isn't about, what did I say? We're not separating Calvinists from their cash. This is not about, we don't need your money. As a church, we're not asking for more of your money, but we think that there's a possibility that for your sake, you need to give more. And one of my favorite verses, or passages, if you've been around me for much time, is 1 Peter 1, where he says, in his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance which can never spoil, perish, or fade, that is being kept for us by God's power through faith for a salvation that is ready to be revealed. So here we go. At the best case scenario, it's short-sighted. Our love of money is short-sighted as Christians. At the worst case, it's an area of unbelief, but really, let's say you've got $100 million in the bank. What is that compared to the inheritance that is being kept for you in heaven? What kind of legacy could you possibly leave your progeny that compares to the legacy of faith that we pass on, that is way more important than stocks and bonds and trust funds and wealth? Yeah.
What I always think about when I think about that kind of level of wealth is I go back to, I can only be one place at one time. I can only be in one car at a time, in one house at a time, in one room at a time. I'm not omnipresent. And multiple houses, multiple cars, multiple clothing, whatever whatever you want to go down. It's like, really, what does that really matter at the end of the day? Because I can only exist in one place at a time.
Yeah.
And I need to learn to be content where I am and enjoy that one place, and recognize that this is. So here's another path I want to go with this. That I was just sitting there thinking, again, Christians, why? I think it gets back to identity and security. I think it gets back to you're forgetting who you are. Mm-hmm. In the eyes of God, and I think it gets back to a deep insecurity. Mm-hmm. If your house is 5 times bigger than it needs to be, you need to ask yourself why. What are you trying to say to the world that really only God can meet? Is it just a basic insecurity that I want people to think highly of me?
Right.
And what's driving that? What? Because I guess the whole issue of insecurity and pride are really mysterious to me, because I think most insecurity is just a fruit of pride. Mm-hmm. But what is it that's causing a person to say, "Oh, I could never drive a car like that. I wouldn't want to be caught dead in a car looking like that." What is at the heart of that? Mm-hmm. And I think it just spirals out from there. I just see it was termed back in the 20s or 30s conspicuous consumption, and this is what America is known for: conspicuous, noticeable, out front. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got to see it. Consumption, mm-hmm. And it's the 2 people that live in a 7,000 square foot house with 6 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms and on and on and on and on, and 2 people live in that house. And I look at it, it's like, that doesn't make any sense. Why? Why do you need so much house? If you've got 10 kids, great. If you got people there all the time, great. But, right? I mean, we just come to accept that as normal. Mm-hmm. and it's like that's not normal. That's not. Yeah,
it's not normal on a world scale.
It's not normal.
Sure,
it's
right?
like why do you need so much house, so much car, so much to project? I mean, what is it you're trying to actually cover up?
Yeah. And then the insecurity could stem from childhood trauma, being raised in poverty, could come from a lot of things, right. But the sin's still not being dealt with. It's not, you don't deal with it by giving yourself more. That's not how that's not going to get to the heart, right? And it comes back to the heart. Our sin issue will always come back to our heart
and it's
issue.
A faith issue. You called it unbelief.
Yeah.
At some point here, I'm trying it's a trust. Do I really actually trust God, or, to make up these areas, or, I just think so much of this goes back to how I'm people pleasing and how I'm seen. And it almost, the people I've known that have tremendous amount of money, I don't even know always if it's even the enjoyment of it, because there's a lot of stress and problems that come with a lot of money. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's like,
more problems, more money, more problems.
Can you even enjoy it?
Right.
You're right. Yeah, because then all of a sudden you're in this hyper protective mode of protecting it. Right. Make sure somebody doesn't steal your money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think, how would we end? Is what's the advice you said, Chris, at the beginning, that if you struggle in this area, be a giver. And I think it's worth noting for maybe a listener that doesn't already know, but. As far as our staff and non-staff pastors, not one person knows what one person gives. Mm-hmm. The only person I know what they give is my wife and I.
Right.
I know what we give. That's it. There's not one. We have our financial whatever you call him, manager at our church, finance manager, David Ellis. He's the only one. Tight-lipped that knows, and that's very purposeful, so that we as pastors wouldn't treat anybody differently. The poorest who gives nothing to the richest who gives nothing to the poorest who gives everything to the richest that gives everything, and so that as best as we can to not show any partiality. But I think it's like for me. I'm being on staff at this church, and the staff is the means by how I provide for my family. Is I'm also a giver. I'm a giver. Our old pastor used to say, to tell the hiring committee or whatever, like, hey, just so you know, like, you're getting at least probably 10% back from what you're putting in. Whatever you're paying them, you're getting 10% of that back.
Yeah.
So
well, that's even a requirement of elders. 1 Timothy 3. That they do not have a love of money.
Yeah.
So
that's right. Well, that's a lot more could be said, right?
Yeah. And I think just to piggyback on something you said earlier, Chris, the whole I've got houses here and there, and I can only be in one place at a time. I think there's a lie that we buy into of transcendence, of almost omnipresence. Like I have to be in multiple places at a time, and it gives us the faintest sense of what it's like to be God, and so we have to kind of reject that out of hand.
Yeah, practically what that often leads to, and not always, and you have to really fight against it, is you're not anywhere.
Yeah.
You're
always somewhere else.
You're always somewhere else. You're not really invested, planted, growing, blooming, because you're here and here and here and here and here.
Mm-hmm. And this is not our home. We're sojourners. Do we really believe that this is not our home?
Right.
Why are we digging our foundation and our roots so deep into the limestone when we're just passersby or passing through?
I can always rent a place too if I go on vacation. There's always Verbo. This episode sponsored by Verbo.
Do we get our cut?
Yeah, we'll get our cut later. I'm sure they're listening. So let's talk about a brand deal, Verbo, if you're listening. And I know you are. So okay, well, also, I mean, I've answered this question before from a church member who asked, I wonder if I should be giving more. And I said, if you're asking that question, then the answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah, if you're in a position to where you're asking, could I be giving more, then the answer is yes.
Yeah, I want to PS on that. If you have income and you're a Christian, you should be giving.
Yeah. Yeah. My pastor said
poverty is not an excuse.
Yeah.
If you have income, and that's everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know anybody that. I mean, if we're talking about somebody with zero. I mean, you're talking destitute, like homeless, shelterless, carless. If you have income, you should be giving a sacrificial, joyful, generous, regular portion of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Period.
Pastor said, somebody would say, "Well, yeah, I can't afford it," and he said, "You can't afford not to."
Right.
Yeah. Said, "I can't afford to give. You can't afford
That's
not
the
to
first
give."
fruit. That's the
For
first
your
fruit.
soul, for your own soul.
Yeah,
exactly.
You can't afford not to give.
And that first fruits is so
hard.
important. It's like this is the first place that you're giving out of the abundance, the first fruits of what the Lord has provided you.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, we hit the 38 mark.
We did.
So congratulations to us. And we're definitely hungry now. So Chris, would you close us in prayer?
Father, thank you that everything we have is every good gift and perfect gift has come down from above, and we do not have what we were not given. Even if we worked for it, Lord, you gave us the ability and the circumstance and the opportunity. Thank you for all of the spiritual and physical blessings of life. Help us to be stewards who hold these things loosely. Help us, even around this table, Lord, to examine our own hearts and selves on this matter and see where we need adjustments. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Thanks for listening to the Kerrville Bible Church podcast. In future episodes, we would like to answer your biblical, theological, or pastoral questions. Send them to us via email at questions@kerrvillebiblechurch.org or leave us a text or voicemail at 830-321-0349.